Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by Matthew Solomon. He is the filmmaker behind Reimagining Safety, Police, Prisons, and Abolition. Um, as we all know, in 2020, we had probably the biggest protest in a generation on regarding racism, and police brutality in this country. And of course, because this is America, we did it in the middle of a pandemic during a presidential election year because we are people that make smart decisions. And so this film was kind of born out of that kind of hairy, scary situation. Um, and uh and we're just kind of doing the tour of crazy things that have happened in the last couple of years. I don't know which order this is going to air in, but at some point on this channel there'll be someone who was at the January 6th thing. And so we're just doing a grand tour of crazy things that have happened in the last couple of years. So we're going to talk to Matthew about that, and it's very exciting. So welcome, Matthew, to the Cameron Channel podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I just have to say the last 4 years have, for me, like anything pre-2020 is outdated and doesn't apply doesn't apply. So yeah, it's like one thing
No,
after another the last four
big
years.
significant events, do that into the human psyche. Like
Mm,
for those of us who are old enough, um, there's pre and post 9/11.
yep.
There's for some of us there's pre and post 2008 financial crisis.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
and definitely the pandemic is definitely one of those, and it's why time is so fuzzy, and it's why 2018 seems like a long time ago. It was only 6 years ago, but it
Mm,
seems like another world, because it was, a long time before a lot of things that changed our lives. And yeah, so why
yeah.
don't we start off the bat by why don't you tell us about the film and what people will get when they watch it on the most popular streaming services, on which it is on
Yeah.
many.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so reimagining safety, I mean, honestly, it's kind of uh, where my life path and various careers that I've had. I was a professional musician. I got into filmmaking. I started working in conflict resolution. Um, when the pandemic started in 2020 and we couldn't go anywhere, I went back to school, and so uh, growing up in Los Angeles, I was born and raised in LA. And I had what I learned was a very unique experience. I went to very integrated, diverse schools. And so at a young age, like my friends were Black, Latino, Chicano, Hispanic, Asian, Muslim, Christian. I'm Jewish. I grew up near West Hollywood, which is the LGBTQ plus, center in Los Angeles. So, I had a very diverse experience growing up. And as a young white male, I was aware at an early age how my friends of color, in particular, my Black friends, were treated very differently, not just by police, but like when we would go to the mall and we would go hang out in places. And so I was aware of that. Born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s. In the early 90s, I went to USC, University of Southern California School of Music, and I was a music student there, but I was always fascinated with societies and how we're constructed and why we do the things we do. And so I was taking sociology classes, and we were learning about structural racism and disparities with policing as the Rodney King beating happened. And then the LA riots that came after that when those officers were acquitted. And in that sociology class, I remember my professor saying, the rules and laws in a society are created by the people in power to keep them in power. They're not going to create laws that take them out of power. And so that framed things in a way that really stuck with me as I, went through my career as a musician, got into filmmaking, and then ultimately conflict resolution because I've always been passionate about bringing people together. So then, pandemic starts. We can't go anywhere. I had been traveling doing conflict resolution, but I couldn't travel. And I decided to go back to school. And I was looking for a
I
master's.
also decided
Yeah.
the pandemic was a great time to get an MFA, so I feel your
Oh,
pain.
cool. Yeah. So I got an MPA. I was looking for a master's program that was social justice related. I figured I was done with the entertainment business. I just wanted to be able to use my access and privilege as a white male to be able to support social change. And this was, COVID and then George Floyd and then, all the protests and everything like that. And so I'm in a master's in public administration program thinking that I'm going to go into politics or policy or something. And I'm applying all of the coursework to the issues with policing and incarceration because I was like, okay, if what can we replace this with? What can we do instead, given that these systems don't really provide safety for everybody? And that started me down the avenues of abolition. And when it came time to do my final thesis, my final paper, one of my academic advisors was like, "We know you know how to write a paper, but I know you're a filmmaker. Why don't you do something creative and do a documentary?" And I laughed because I was like, that's a lot of work. Like I'm a filmmaker. It's not going to be, like a short little video, and you can't cover all of this in a short little video. And she said, "Well, do it anyway." And so I accepted the challenge. I filmed the interviews on my iPhone. A lot of the B-roll footage is on my iPhone, edited on my laptop. It was a school project, but then I showed it to some people and they were like, "You know what? This is really good. People need to see this." And so I did some of the extra work to get it to a place where it was, could be released. And we started doing film festivals and winning awards. But more importantly, we started doing community screenings across the country where we would screen the film and then have panel discussions with local leaders who could, speak to the issues in their community. And so
Yes,
to
you've
date,
just done a whole run up the West Coast.
yeah, we were just in
I was noticing,
Washington.
and you're going to be
Mhm.
here in New Jersey next week.
That's right. That's
Yes.
right. And so as of today, we've had 52 screenings across the country hosted by more than 70 organizations, including the Black Panther Party in Washington State, in New Jersey, the Trenton Anti-Violence Coalition. Um, Actually, I mean, we've screened in New Jersey like 6 times already, and we're, going to be in
And I
Newark
was just
next
mentioning
week.
that if you're in the
Yeah,
tri-state area, he's coming in late
yeah,
April, early May. So if you're, so
yep,
yes, we're pre-plugging your website.
yeah,
There
yeah.
may be a screening near you.
There will be, and I'm going to be back in August. There are some organizers who are creating a Reimagining Safety Festival in August, where they're going to screen the film and then they're going to have exhibits from local organizations. There's going to be music and art and things like that that are all tied into creating real safety in everybody's communities.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it just like really kind of took off and got, you know, took on a life of its own, and it's been incredible.
Yeah, I think so it's kind of funny that you decided to address this topic. I also took a similar path. I wanted, for my thesis project in my MFA, I wanted to do Downton Abbey set in the antebellum South.
Mhm.
And I later realized that was a terrible way to describe the book because I did not have the same experience of Downton Abbey as everyone else did. Um, and I'm kind of like, you guys are not seeing all the class struggle that's inherent in the narrative of this show. Okay, no one, never mind. Weren't watching the same show.
Yeah.
Keep calm and carry on. Um, so I really have to find a different way to describe my book, but I really wanted to dig into the the more difficult and salacious parts. So really, you and I are covering the same problem from either end.
Hmm.
I'm covering its beginning, and you're
Yeah.
covering the results.
Yeah. Yeah.
um. So yes, and it was, and I plunked down this is 1/3. I
Okay.
plunked down a
Wow.
120,000 word behemoth. Um and it was really, a lot to write and finish editing and put together, and I got a lot of great compliments from
Mm,
faculty on it and all this type of
awesome.
things. So yeah. When someone is kind of, calls something you've done an achievement, that's a compliment you take with you to
Yes.
your grave. And
Yep.
so
Absolutely.
um,
Absolutely.
especially from Richard Panic, who is a writer trademark, lives in Manhattan doing the writerly thing, was my second reader, and he's like, "You wanted a sweeping Southern epic, and you got it, and it is an achievement." I'm like, "Well, thank you. I will be preserving this report for the rest of my life.
Yes. Yeah.
This will be printed on the back of the programs at my funeral." And so, yes,
Yep.
I was fascinated by by all of that. Well, I'm gonna get back to your film by going another
Mhm.
route first. Right before I hit record, we were talking about the last 4 years have been nuts and all this sort of thing.
Mhm.
Um, and in addition, to the violence we've had in Black communities and all this type of thing, um, I have never seen more publicly spewed anti-Semitism than I have in the last 2 years. Um,
Yeah.
it's gotten so bad, I've started saving some of the memes and whatnot to show people to say this is I mean, Herman Goebbels wishes he
Hmm.
had this type of reach,
Yeah.
and there are Nazis who wish they had propaganda this effective, um,
Yeah.
as what is going on. So having had all these conversations and watched the African American community go through this, what's it like to watch, social media platforms, Twitter. I'm sorry, did I say that out loud? And other such places just kind of embrace, all these terrible anti-Semitic things. Like having done this film,
Hmm. I
you
mean,
know,
well, that's, part of
how's
the
that
tra
going for you?
yeah, it's been rough. I mean, it's been rough, like,
I would
you know,
imagine
s-
so.
yeah, and on a lot of levels, right? So, 2020, and I could go back to, 2016, the when Trump was elected, like there was a definite shift.
Well, there was that terrible synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh,
Right.
Tree of
Yep.
Life, I think it was called.
Synagogue shooting.
Yeah,
I don't know if I said this, but I'm Jewish, and grew up, went to Hebrew school. I had an interesting experience because the temple we went to was in Beverly Hills, which is a wealthy part of Los Angeles, but my parents were both school teachers. And so we were not, the rich, you know, white wealthy folks. And so I had an experience of being othered uh, in my religious studies where I was an outcast. I got bullied a lot. We didn't call it bullying back then. I got made fun of constantly, and it was really
right.
rough. And I never really felt part of the community. But I was, my grandparents on my mom's side were Holocaust survivors. And so I grew up with the stories and what they went through and never again, which also kind of tied into how I saw hypocrisy in religion and in society and in, like, being raised in American schools with everyone's created equal, justice for all. But yet, like I said, that was not the case with my Black friends in particular. That was not
Yeah.
their experience. With religion, where it's supposed to, we're supposed to be like loving and accepting and all of that, but there were definitely biases and prejudices and things like that. So it was really so it's those are things that have kind of stayed with me. And then 2020, actually in the film, Hawk Newsome, who's the co-founder of Black Lives Matter New York and the co-founder of Black Opportunities, talks about how, in the United States, people are happy with, or they don't really care if Black people are murdered or Jewish people are murdered. And he was talking about how in Black liberation movements, there's traditionally always been Jewish people around who have been very supportive. And and so, there's been like these big intersections
That
where
was particularly true of the NAACP in the 50s, which really helped get civil rights as a movement off the ground,
yeah,
and also even from a donations monetary perspective, a lot of important, early funding for all those organizations. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So like there's been this like mutual support. Um, and there's an organization called Bend the Arc, which is a national Jewish organization that centers Black liberation. And so, like, all of this has been like really, and these are things that I've learned in the last couple of years, doing this tour with the film. And so, all of that kind of felt really good, was bringing me back kind of into the Jewish community that I had been separate from. And then, after October 7th, and what's been going on with Palestine, and and Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank and everything, and seeing some Jewish folks who had been very supportive of Black liberation movements all of a sudden be like, you know what? We were in the streets with you in 2020, but I'm never supporting Black Lives Matter again because Black Lives Matter spoke out in support of Palestinian liberation. And so for me, coming from a sociological perspective and coming from looking at systems of oppression, recognizing that the Palestinian people are in these ghettos, if you compare it to like Warsaw Ghetto, World War II, all of that,
Yeah.
like they're an oppressed people. And of course
No,
they're
and
going to
I
push back.
kind of laugh. People didn't do their homework.
Mhm.
The African American community has been holding it down for Palestine
Yes.
at least since the 90s that I know of, might predate that.
Oh,
But
it's before, yeah.
yes,
Hmm.
I have been, when I was in college, I was a part of some really great organizations. We had some really great African American speakers, and the Palestine, and this is 2000. I graduated in '09. This is like 2008, 2009. We were talking about Palestine back then. It wasn't, I mean, it's always kind of a hot topic when something happens,
Hmm.
but it wasn't a super hot topic. And it's like, no, 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 because it's the same. It's the self kind of same situation. And that's why I've always
Hmm.
said to criticize Israel, the government, is not anti-Semitic. I don't have
Right.
a problem with Jewish people. I have some problem with the actions of a certain government where
Yeah.
Jewish people happen to be in power.
Hmm.
But my problem is what do you expect when you send in settlers and other people into the West Bank? They go up to houses, throw everybody out that's living there, and move in new people. The
Hmm.
now freshly homeless are going to have a problem. Like,
Yeah.
of course, are going to have a problem. And it's kind of, it's a bit of a kind of a stark image because it's like, it's amazing to watch a people who should understand
Yes.
what it's like to be evicted from home and hearth and sent somewhere else to then be doing that to somebody else.
Yes. And that and
Okay,
that and
that's a
that's been,
decision.
yeah. Hmm.
And it's a very, it's a very difficult thing. And yes, there's not a lot of there's no good guy, bad guy dynamic in that conflict.
Yeah.
Everybody's got some shit. And when you
Hmm.
expand beyond just that dynamic to the neighbors, it gets worse.
Yes.
Nobody
Mm.
wants to take the side of Egypt. They're ruled by the Muslim Brotherhood. Lebanon's a failed state that's a proxy for Iran. Syria, oh, what a great country to do business with, all this sort of thing.
Hmm.
And so there's no good guys, bad guys. But if you try to quit making it a superhero movie and be kind of like, who has power, who's misusing that power,
Hmm.
who is being unnecessarily oppressed by that power, you'll find out that whether they're in West Bank, in Gaza, or stuck forever in a refugee camp in Jordan, the Palestinian people, since the Ottomans left, have not had a home or a place to exist
Yeah.
in over on 100 and what is it now, 6 years. They have not had a place to actually be and exist. And that's not just an Israeli problem, it was a British problem before then.
Hmm.
um and it's a very difficult sort of thing. And on top of that, very unfortunately, you have Hamas, which is one of the most well-connected, well-funded terrorist organizations on the planet, who the Bush administration managed to put into government in
Hmm.
2004 because they make smart decisions. um Trying to reinforce this and make this happen. But it is, when you take away all that and view it as you have another system of oppression that is occurring, and when you kind of look at it from that aspect, it's
Hmm.
like, you really didn't think, because there's almost no Palestinians living in the West Bank anymore. Most people don't know that. It's not the way it used to be, where there was a big chunk on kind of glued onto the side, and now they've put in so many settlements. Most of the Palestinians are gone. It has become fully Israeli. And so this is kind of the last stand. And for better or for worse, people are getting eliminated.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
unfortunately what is happening there. And it's quite difficult. And for all of those reasons, um, in the Black community, we know what it's like to have people come and burn your house down and steal
Hmm.
property from you and all this type of thing. It's happened.
Yeah.
And in my first book, when I wrote about racism, I talked all the ways in which that has happened and occurred. I mean, there was one time in Mississippi, they burned down the courthouse with all their own property records to steal land from Black people. Like white people
Yeah.
commit, sort of thing. Um, and that I think is why there's kind of been this long standing of, oh, we know exactly what's going on. We've been living this for checks notes 150 years. Yeah,
Hmm.
we know exactly what's going on with them, and we don't like it for them any better than we like it for us. And it takes a long time to get to a place where you can have rights in a society and those rights have veracity, because often we can write a lot of speeches and all this type of thing, but if there's not a cultural attitude that's going to allow that to be, it doesn't matter what laws you pass or all this type of thing. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
So, well, I
Yeah.
imagine this whole October 7th thing's put you in about a rather awkward position then.
That's that's a good way to, yeah, slightly awkward. No, it's been it like the first week, um, first 2 weeks, like I didn't know who to talk to, who I could talk to, what to even say. Like I was trying to sort through a lot of it myself. I was watching all of the debates, online on social media that would, well, what about this? Well, what about that? What about this? And and like all the historical um arguments and whose land is it and all of that. And two things happened. I'm in a PhD program for transformative social change. And in one of my courses, we were having a Zoom meeting, and one of my classmates is Palestinian and lost 30 family members in that first week. And the professor mentioned that, like, yeah, he lost 30 family members, and then kind of went on. I was like, wait, hang on a second. 30 people, 30, like, I just kept repeating and trying to really grasp the weight of 30 family members within a week, and this, I lost a lot of friends and family first year of COVID, including my mom. And my mom died of breast cancer, but it was like right at the beginning of COVID. My uncle died
Well,
from
the poor woman
COVID.
had no
Uh,
immune system. She was so
yeah,
vulnerable.
yeah.
I'm very, my condolences to
Thank
you.
you. Thanks. And then, but I had like friends from junior high school that died of COVID, long, like a lot of people,
Yeah.
and so to have 30 family members within a week. And so, we were sitting with that and kind of talking through the different things that were happening. And one of my other classmates was like, at the end of the day, the arguments that people are making are about who has the right to murder mass amounts of people. And so, like, I don't care about nation states. I care about people. I care about our humanity. I care about uh, old people, young people. I care about people. And so when we have these systems of oppression, when we have violence like that, when we have people being murdered, um, it's not right. Like it doesn't matter what the history or the policy or whatever is. Because a lot of that also is uh, systemically set up to benefit somebody or a group of people financially, right? And that's the insidiousness of all of it, of racism, of nation states. Is all, you could trace it all back to the financial incentive. um you were talking about like the people who have been put out of their homes. Here in LA, we had Chavez Ravine, which is where there, are thousands of Chicano people living there that we cleared out to build Dodger Stadium. Central Park, there were, it was a black community cleared out to, you know, make a park.
Hundreds of neighborhoods anytime an interstate entered a major city.
Yes. Hmm.
In season 2 of this podcast, I talked about that, and it's that was true in Denver, Chicago, New York. I mean, because back then it was urban renewal. It was basically to get rid of the slums. This is a poor native town. The buildings look
Hmm.
like crap. Guess where the new shiny interstate's going? Right through their living room, sort of thing. Um, and I mean, were those communities necessarily that great and all that type of thing? But they were communities people did live there. And unfortunately, the replacement that we built for them and the requirements that were put on it ended up being even far worse. And it actually ended up probably causing more poverty than it ever actually solved, you know.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sadly
Right. Right.
enough,
Right. Yeah.
when you start having these conversations, people still, want to do that today. Well, nobody cares about that part of town, so
Hmm.
put it over there, sort of thing.
Yeah. And then we have the
Um,
gentrification that pushes people out, and
yes.
people that have lived in, like, their families, like, and there have been so few opportunities for Black and brown families to build, to have a home, build generational wealth and things like that. And so neighborhoods that they've lived in for 50, 60, maybe, what year is it? 2024? I don't know.
Yeah,
60, 70 years, right? And
right,
all of a sudden they're getting pushed out. Where are they going to go?
right.
Who has resources, and like, I
Well, and,
even,
and also people lose this because people then kind of move everywhere and all over. People lose community that they relied on,
yes,
family connections, all this type, friend connections, all this type of thing. Which as a person of color in a big city can be important just to survival.
yes,
Um,
well, yeah,
and in the same way that poor white people use the advantage of living in a small town to have the friendly neighbor that watches their kids for the 2 hours after school before they get home from work, all this type of thing. That stuff is really important. And in a big city, when you then take that neighborhood and spread them all over, you lose all of that. And people, really, it causes kind of unnecessary suffering.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And then tying into the film, into reimagining safety, I was really interested in what are the alternatives and solutions to police violence and mass incarceration that perpetuate these cycles of harm, that
Right.
displace people, that criminalize, unhoused people, people with disabilities, people with, addictions, things like that. And it all comes back to community, like you were saying. When people are in community, when communities have resources, when people have their needs met and are taken care of, crime naturally comes down, because people don't, like, there's not that desperation where people have to steal, for food or clothes or whatever. And so applying that to, like, everything we're talking about, it boggles the mind, but that if people, like, we could solve homelessness tomorrow. I was on a panel, with, a policy, a land policy expert. I think it was in Sacramento. And they were saying that, the amount of money to solve homelessness worldwide is really not that much in the scheme of things. Like, we could do that, but we're not, because folks are making money and gaining power and all of that. All these industries of oppression, right? Policing, the courts, the prisons, all of that,
Particularly
are
the
all
private prison
benefiting. Right?
industry.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Land
Yeah.
developers, like in LA, there's a lot of opportunity to build affordable housing, but people are making too much money off of, putting up huge condos and
We were all
charging way
set
too
to build
much.
social housing in Seattle and an old naval base that the city of Seattle happens to
Yep.
own.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that naval base happens to be next to the most expensive neighborhood in town. You can't
Mhm.
imagine we never put up that social housing and why.
Yep.
Like that, which is, very unfortunate because it would have been able to be in a nice, stable neighborhood next to Magnolia. I mean, great, and great views, to be honest with you.
Yep.
Um,
Oh man,
and
it's
yeah, and it
beautiful
just
there.
it
Yeah.
never happened because everyone in Magnolia was like, there's no way in hell you're building social housing. And everybody would like to build social housing, but not anywhere near them.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
unfortunately, it's
Exactly.
got to be near someone in order to work. And for a
Hmm.
lot of people, it's got to be somewhat near the downtown core of a city. A lot of those people work in the gray economy. They are
Hmm.
window washers, dishwashers,
Yeah.
all this type of thing. They do odd jobs. That's not going to work. And they don't have usually transportation. You can't put them in the suburbs. They can't survive.
Hmm.
It's a very difficult thing to balance, and unfortunately, city councils and mayors tend to not have backbones on this stuff. They just don't.
Hmm.
And then rather than trying to figure out something to mitigate the problem, it just ends up not getting built at all, you know. And people have terrible memories of the projects, which failed for one reason only. The federal government gave up on funding them and they couldn't self-fund.
Yeah.
The federal government built these expensive buildings and
Hmm.
depended on the residents who couldn't afford to pay rent to pay enough money to keep up expensive buildings. And everyone was surprised when there
Hmm.
was no money and they started falling apart. This was a surprise to no one who knows basic math. And so these things that would actually solve these problems are quite difficult. And nowadays, and I hate to say it, but when people talk about, oh God, I'm having a terrible time and I can't really afford to live, my first question is one, do you live in California? And if the answer is yes, two, then there's really only a solution. You have to leave.
Hmm.
And I hate that for people who've lived there for generations and all this
Yep.
type of thing, and probably have great family ties and all this other thing. But said very honestly, the only way you're going to survive, given the conditions you're in, is to go literally anywhere else in this country. Like literally anywhere else. This is the only way you're going to survive because
Hmm.
it's so untenable.
Well, it's,
Like,
the thing about that also, because I've been all over the country with, with the film,
oh
and
yes.
everywhere I go, people are like, it's so expensive. Like I was just in Washington State. We did screenings in Tacoma, Olympia, Redmond, and Bellingham. And then we did one in Seattle and another in Tacoma back in October. And like the cost of living there is really high,
That's
compared to
why I
what it used to
left.
be.
I had to get up
Okay,
to the East
yeah.
Coast because it was cheaper.
Hmm.
I pay $200 more for three times the apartment in Wilmington, Delaware, if you can believe,
Wow. Yeah.
than I did in Seattle. And the
Hmm.
price of gas is lower. And I don't have 10.9% sales tax anymore. It's
Right.
lovely.
Yeah. The same. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean it's quite a, it's quite an ordeal. It's quite an ordeal.
Yeah.
So no, I mean it is expensive everywhere, especially the price of housing it's so bad now the middle class is having problems with it. So if you are, working fast food, you're making 10, 15 bucks an hour.
Hmm.
Yeah. I know
Yeah.
somebody who is a teacher can't afford to live on her own. It's not
Oh, yeah.
possible.
Oh, yeah. I know.
And she doesn't
Yeah.
live in a terribly crazy area. I live in a nicer
Mhm.
city than she does. Um, and still can't afford to live on it. I mean, and so when it was like, well, why are all these people on the street? We used to have really cheap apartments and really cheap hotels where we
Mhm.
warehouse these folks.
Yeah.
That all went away. So now we're warehousing them under a bridge, you know. And it's awful and it costs people money. My car got broken into three times in a year and a half when I lived in Seattle.
Mhm.
Total cost $3,000 by the time it was all said and done.
Yeah.
This is costing, whether we're paying for this,
Yes.
not in the ways we would expect,
Hmm.
but we are paying for this.
Yeah.
So when it comes to creating safe environments without a lot of police, what are some of the things that you come up with in your film?
Yeah. Well, what's talked about a lot, resources, right? When communities have jobs, housing, people are clothed, they're fed,
Hmm.
um, all of that. Community practices for accountability, so restorative justice, um, violence prevention workers, the community responders to deal with uh, like conflict and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's more community based. It's more like investing in each other as human beings versus I'm going to put my wall up so I don't have to deal with you or anybody else. If there's a problem, like Gina Viola, who's in the film, talks about like if there's a dead squirrel in the yard, people, white people call 911. So
Right.
divesting from those systems and being able to, well, and then, a couple people in the film talk about this also, where we don't know, we haven't been taught how to communicate and get along with each other and our neighbors also. So there's also an element of social education and communication education and learning how to like identify and manage our own traumas and our own insecurities and our own stuff that comes up that keeps us from uh, relating to one another. And so like we by design been, raised on, American independence, individualism, exceptionalism, all of that, which has
Yeah.
taken us out of community. And so when we're in community, when we have relationships with our neighbors and our neighbors' neighbors and things like that, there's there's naturally more safety that occurs because we know who to call if there's a problem. We know, like, I can rely on my neighbor. If I have to, like, if there's an emergency, I got to run out, I need somebody to watch my kids. Like, I know somebody's got my back, or I got their back, or we can trade food or whatever. Like, and actually the Black Panthers in Washington State do a lot of education around this in their communities, teaching people how to live sustainably in community with others, teaching people how to resolve conflict. There's another organization, APTP, Anti-Police Terror Project, based in Oakland, but I'm connected with the Sacramento chapter, where they do conflict resolution training. And, so all of this, it's just like learning how to coexist again and be in community. And then when we have our needs met and we're not, we're housed and clothed and fed, like I said, um, crime naturally comes down. And this has been shown statistically. It's been proven time and time again. It just we're also heavily socialized into there's evil around the corner. And we need the, militarized police to keep us safe from how evil, like, those quote those people are. And it's, and we're drilled, this is all drilled in, like 50% of programming is propaganda, is, we like
Yeah.
TV shows and movies about police and the court system and, you know, the serial killers. Like, people love the serial killer documentaries and all of that stuff. So we're fighting against a lot of propaganda, a lot of false information that makes us fearful, that keeps us from really connecting with one another.
No, I mean, yeah, the culture around, Law and Order and all those, shows that, especially networks love to, produce because they
Mhm.
always get numbers. Um, Definitely one, give people a very rarefied idea of what the police can do in terms of fighting crime,
Right.
or the amount of time and resources spent on crime fighting.
Mhm.
Um, and and also the just the I think the culture of, there's this whole, sort of criminal underclass that's coming for you sort of thing.
Mhm.
um and while, yes, if you lift up enough rocks you can definitely find them, um that's definitely not true in the average person's day-to-day experience, and that's also probably not true of the people that are living in your immediate vicinity, sort of
Mhm.
thing. um and there's also some policy changes we could make that would eliminate some of that, as Portugal did. We don't decriminalize drugs, don't legalize them. We don't want people, doing cocaine at McDonald's. But if we treat it for what it is, which is a mental health disorder,
Mhm.
and we don't get people in cycles of incarceration and the resulting poverty because of it, we can do a lot. A whole lot.
Yeah.
And it also stops addiction. Portugal saw a 70% decrease in that. The program has been highly successful. Um, there's a lot of that. In the people that you've talked to, a lot, because of the time that your film covers, a lot of cities have tried different things in terms of defunding the police, which has become such a loaded phrase.
Mhm.
I shudder to say it in the course of this interview. But Minneapolis has done some things, Dallas has done some things, we did some things in Seattle, um, all this sort of thing. What's been the reaction in your circles to all of that?
Well, I mean, the reality is like the people were talking about defunding the police, and any defunding that has happened has been very small. Like, it's, there were supposed to be, I think it was like 14 cities in 2020 that were going to, like, defund and invest in other things. But then at the end of the day, I think 11 of those 14 ended up not doing it, you know.
Yeah.
but I will
We
say,
did get social
mhm,
workers as part of the Seattle Police Department, which is really
okay,
important.
yeah,
Denver had had that for years and
hmm,
years, and I had advocated for it because it works really well in Denver. And in
yes,
Seattle, it worked really well. In fact, the first instance made national headlines. There was a naked man standing on a power pole on Aurora Avenue.
hmm,
Um, and rather than, having the police, I suppose, shoot him down from the power pole or whatever that they would do, they sent out a nice man with a bucket hat and a orange vest who
yes,
talked him down, and he came down on his own.
yeah,
Um, and now fortunately he was white, which we all figured out within about 10 seconds of the
hmm,
news coverage because you could see everything.
yeah,
But it was a demonstration of, for Seattle, the new system and the
hmm,
new system working. And Minneapolis has done yeoman's work at really reforming their whole thing, which I think has been, rather interesting. But now people are maybe kind of unhappy because there's too much, property crime and all this type of thing. And
hmm.
so it's a difficult balance. That's why I wanted kind of your perspective. What have you
Yeah.
been hearing from your
Well, I will
people?
say, well, so in Newark, New Jersey,
Yeah,
they took 5% of the police budget and put that into the Department of Violence Prevention or Violence Prevention Department, something like that. But it's
right.
basically community responder groups who respond to nonviolent calls instead of the police, and crime has come down. In Denver, you mentioned like the STAR program. There's the Cahoots
Mhm.
program, which is really well known in Eugene, Oregon. Neither of those have needed armed police to show up. They've handled things, and it's saved those cities millions of dollars because they're not paying out, like the police brutality, or they're
Yeah,
not paying out uh, settlements for that sort of thing.
yeah,
In Sacramento, there's a violence prevention community responder model, but they're only able to operate between certain hours. So the hours that they operate, they're really effective. But so what I'm what I'm getting at is these things work, these systems work. It's just not enough is being invested into them. But every time they're implemented, it's shown to be a positive thing. It's shown to reduce the amount of killings and arrests and to improve community safety.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's really where the focus has to be, because that's the end goal. And people, I always get tired of this because I'm kind of like, you act like Black people don't want to live in safe communities. I assure you they do.
Hmm.
Um, and people, somehow act like, a safe community is something that only the right kind of people
Yeah.
um want and desire, and then, and oftentimes that comes at the exclusion of anybody who is too poor or too brown
Hmm.
um in order to preserve something like that. And I get concerned when I see people openly talking about, race and IQ, and talking about, yeah, that's what we're gonna have in the future, walled neighborhoods with heavy gates to keep out, the Browns and the others and all this
Hmm.
type of thing. And it's just kind of like, I've been to countries where people live like that. It's expensive and extremely unpleasant
Hmm.
for all but the very wealthy. I'm like, you think you and your $75,000 a year job is going to get inside that club? Oh, my sweet summer child, do I have news for you? And how much that sort of thing costs, in second and third world countries where that sort of thing is really common.
Right.
Um, it would be far cheaper and more expedient if we took the time to actually make our communities better and safer, which also gets into income inequality issues and fun
Yeah.
stuff like that that we
All of that.
won't bother with right now. But it is excellent. Well, we've almost up to the hour. Even though I was late to this interview.
Mhm.
And all this sort of thing, but we usually go about 45 minutes to an hour. So why don't you tell us where we can learn more about you, your film, follow online, and where we can stream it?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the best place to start is the website, which is reimaginingsafetymovie.com. And
Yes.
we're
Which has the
also,
trailer and all the links to watch.
yep, trailer, all the links. We're on streaming on Amazon, Tubi, YouTube, and Google Play. And then we have educational distribution through Good Docs. So all of that's on the website, reimaginingsafetymovie.com. And we're still traveling around doing community screenings. And so we're going back and forth across the country. So, wherever you're listening in from will probably be near you. If you'd like to host a screening, you can reach me through the website. And that's how all of this started. Is people start, I started reaching out, but then people started contacting me and saying, like, how do we get a screening in Olympia, or how do we get one
Yeah.
in San Antonio, Texas? And
No, I've
and
been to
yeah.
so many of these screenings for independent films, all through the years. One of the very first things, this is a little sidebar, one of the very first things I ever wrote when I was 17 years old was a review of an independent film screening like
Oh
this.
wow.
So these are very near and dear to my heart because it's how I
Yeah.
got my start. In fact, I actually republished that piece
Ah.
on the Cameron Journal a couple months ago as kind of an archival, memorial sort of, way back in 2005, there was this young guy in Denver who wanted to write, and he felt very important getting personally invited to this independent film screening, and
Yeah.
here was the result, sort of thing. Um, and I had to I had to put some things on it because I was more conservative and more Republican back then. So I'm kind of like, this is not representative of today's political views, but it's
Right,
fun to
right, right.
read, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's very good. So all right, so it's give the website one more time.
Reimaginingsafetymovie.com.
That's it. Thank you. That'll be good for
Yeah.
when I edit this.
Yeah.
So, all right, excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal
My
podcast.
pleasure. Thank you.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.